Welcome back. All this month, we're recognizing Men's Mental Health Month for Self-Care Saturday. Experts say men in general find it hard to express their anger and frustration, but tonight, licensed clinical psychologist Dr. Ryan Warner shows you how to effectively cope with anger within the Black community. Dr. Ryan Warner, thank you so much for joining us for Self-Care Saturday, and welcome to BNC.
Thanks so much for having me, Brittany.
And we are so glad to have you with us because we're talking about something very, very important during Men's Mental Health Month. So, Dr. Warner, so we all actually deal with anger, right? But there are different layers of frustration when it comes to being a Black man. Talk about some of those triggers that lead to anger as a Black man.
Yes. So, as Black men, it's important to note that we may experience additional challenges compared to other groups. So, for instance, we experience systemic racism, right? We may have additional economic challenges, poverty, unemployment. There may be additional neighborhood stressors as well, living in a violent community, for instance. And ultimately, sometimes we don't really know how to effectively express our anger.
Yeah.
And it's also important to know that anger is a secondary emotion. So underneath anger may be pain, maybe hurt, maybe disappointment. And when we don't feel that we have power or control over a situation, then sometimes we don't know how to effectively express that emotion. So hopefully today we could talk more about some additional strategies about what we can do. But it's important to first be aware of what anger is and how does it look for the Black community.
And how important is it to use it and not avoid it when you have those feelings?
So that's really hard, right? Because as Black men and as men in general, we often think about toxic masculinity, and that ideology, we don't really know how to effectively express that emotion. So we think about toxic masculinity. I know when I was growing up, I learned that to be a man means to really not show any emotion that is negative. For instance, sadness, disappointment, right? And I've also learned that, anger sometimes is looked at in a way that is not helpful.
I know I have brothers, obviously, a dad, a fiance, and as Black men sometimes, and I'm having conversations with them, it's hard for them to express the frustrations and the different things that they deal with on a daily basis. But, you have to find a way to do it in a healthy way, right?
So, but oftentimes avoidance is easier for us to do, right? Yeah. So, for instance, it's easy for us to push down those emotions, to not think about it. And when we do that, in the short term, we may feel that that's helpful for us. We don't have to deal with that difficult emotion during that time. But in the long term, it's actually maladaptive to our well-being. And it may come out in ways that are not healthy. For instance, it may come out with us taking that anger out on other people, for instance, our loved ones. Maybe we engage in a emotional or a physical or verbal abuse towards other people, right? So it's important to be aware of how that anger impacts us and what it looks like. But it's also important to know that anger is not always a bad thing. For instance, if I'm playing sports, and I'm kind of upset about how the other team is talking to me, and maybe I'm losing on the scoreboard, then that anger is going to fuel me. It's going to motivate me to make change and help me accomplish that goal at hand. So it's important to know that we're able to control our emotions, control our anger, and find outlets to effectively express that. Then it can actually be more helpful instead of unhelpful.
And so, Dr. Warner, why is it so important, why is it in our Black community that Black men don't normally go seek help to deal with this? And what are your recommendations for those men who have been experiencing kind of this internal battle, if you will?
So number one, let's look at the mental health stigma in the Black community. Yeah. And then you add additional layer of being a man, right? And thinking about toxic masculinity and how we have maybe not been taught about how to effectively express our emotions. Or maybe we think that seeking help makes us weak, it makes us vulnerable. Yeah. And no one likes to feel weak, no one likes to feel vulnerable, right? But it's important to know that actually seeking help when you experience distress actually makes you stronger. Because it gives you that control and that power back, right? So as Black men, we have to be able to feel a little bit more comfortable talking about these challenging topics and find avenues that we can effectively express our anger.
Yeah. And what are your recommendations for people who are walking away from this saying how I can actually deal with this?
Definitely. So number one, we need to establish a broader vocabulary around our emotions. So oftentimes as men, we say we're angry or we're sad, right? But there is more emotions than just feeling down or feeling angry, right? So for instance, do we feel disappointed? Do we feel that we don't have control over a situation? Do we feel hurt, right? So being able to establish additional vocabulary around that term is important. So that's number one. And number two, we need to be able to recognize our triggers and our warning signs, right? So for instance, if we're driving down the road and our check engine light comes on in our car, then that's a warning sign to cue us to say, hey, we need to do something, right? I need to pull over, I need to get this issue fixed. And we also have internal warning signs that we need to be more aware of. For instance, when you feel angry or disappointed or upset, what do you notice about your physical body, right? Does your heart start beating really fast? Do your muscles start to tense up? And then what do you notice about your thoughts, right? Do you start to have racing thoughts? Do you have thoughts that you talk down to yourself and engage in negative self-talk? So all of these are important as well to be aware of, and that's going to help us better manage our emotions.
All right, Dr. Warner, thank you so much for giving us all this great advice and joining us for Self-Care Saturday. We appreciate your time.
Thank you so much for having me.